At the close of 2021, the Episcopal Church commissioned a poll. They partnered with Ipsos, a reputable and well-known polling company, and they called this study the Jesus in America study. Now, the results are, on the one hand, unsurprising. We've all heard what they found. But on the other hand, they are a wake-up call. We should take them very seriously. Because they found, on the one hand, that Jesus is a compelling, interesting, and important figure to the broader American community, religious and non-religious. There's an openness to Jesus. But there's a major disconnect between perceptions of Jesus on the one hand and Christians on the other. Further, there's a disconnect between how Christians view and describe themselves and how non-Christians describe Christians. So let's take a look at how this plays out. Christians describe themselves primarily as compassionate, loving, respectful, and friendly. Those are wonderful qualities that I hope that we all hope to live up to. But non-Christians described Christians as hypocritical, judgmental, self-righteous, and arrogant. An evangelical polling group, Barna, did similar research. But they asked interesting questions. They asked, for instance, what makes you doubt the Christian faith? And they separated these groups into non-Christians who have no affiliation and those who follow other faiths. And they asked, what makes you doubt the truth of Christianity? And you would expect maybe conflict between faith and science, the problem of suffering and evil, or my own convictions in my other religion, maybe. But no, overwhelmingly, the judgmentalism and hypocrisy of Christians. It made them doubt the truth of Christianity. Now, you know what our passage is today. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. And taking that passage and these statistics, some of you may be feeling a little defensive, a little attacked. And so you might have defensive thoughts. The first is, yeah, we know this. We know that Jesus tells us not to judge and to avoid hypocrisy. This is old news. Those passages are well understood, and you might be thinking, I'm probably not going to learn much from this sermon or this passage. I think I understand this. And while that may be true, the Ipsos Episcopal poll found that only 13% of evangelicals, 25% of Roman Catholics, and 25% of mainline Protestants believed that judging yourself before judging others was an important teaching of Jesus. Mainline Protestants is what we are in the Presbyterian Church. Only 25% said they thought that that was an important teaching of Jesus. So maybe we don't understand this quite as well as we think we do. The second defensive thought might be this, though, and it's related to the first, but it's more pointed, and it's this. That's about those other Christians. That's about those Christians down the street, Pastor. Or maybe that's about that other pastor I see on Instagram wagging his finger. Those are the Christians that are giving us all a bad name. And while I understand this, I do. There's probably a lot of truth in that. Those other Christians are not in the room with us this morning. And that pastor is not going to stumble upon our YouTube stream, I promise you. In a moment, I'm going to read Jesus' words about judging not, about examining yourself before pointing the finger at others. And I want to challenge you to not immediately apply that to other people. That would immediately be going against what Jesus is trying to teach us this morning. And so as I read these words of Jesus, first hear them as the word of God for you specifically. Let's hear Jesus' words. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For the measure you give will be the measure you get back. He also told them a parable. Can a blind person guide a blind person? Will not both fall into a pit? A disciple is not above the teacher, but everyone who is fully qualified will be like the teacher. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but do not notice the log in your own? Or, how can you say to your neighbor, friend, let me take out the speck in your eye when you yourself do not see the log in your own eye? You hypocrite. First, take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. This is the word of the Lord. I see this passage kind of broken down like this. It was just on the screen. There are 4 commands that Jesus gives here. Judge not, condemn not, forgive, and give. And then he kind of gives 4 illustrations to explain these commands. He talks about measurements in the marketplace, the blind leading the blind, students and teachers, logs, and specks. Now, Jesus is cramming a lot into these 6 verses, this middle portion of his sermon. But I think it can be broken down to 2 major themes, and that is reciprocity, which is you get what you give, and hypocrisy. Take that log out of your own eye. We will take these in turn and try and apply these to our own lives, to take Jesus seriously as he teaches us about what it means to be a Christian in our communities. So let's first take reciprocity. You get what you give. The moral logic of reciprocity is very simple. Generally, you do get what you give. If you are a judgmental and condemning person, you are generally not going to be easily forgiven by those who have experienced you that way. Similar to the children's message, when a kid sees meanness, responds with meanness. When we are judged, we are very tempted to just judge right back. Remember, this whole section of the sermon, it's in the context of loving our enemies and the golden rule. Do unto others what you would have them do unto you. And so Jesus is explaining those teachings. He's not starting a new section. He's giving further instruction on the same thing. And Jesus gives a little illustration of his own, a little sermon illustration to explain this reciprocity. And he uses an example from the ancient marketplace. Packed down, shaken together, overflowing. Now, I want to show you a picture of some of the measurements that were used in the ancient marketplace. You might not be able to read all of those, but in the ancient world, it wasn't as if they packaged flour or barley or corn or whatever and you could buy it at the supermarket. You had to bring your own container. And they tried to standardize these as much as possible, but it wasn't always done very well. In fact, there are laws in the Old Testament condemning those who tried to cheat others by weighing the scales down unfairly. But I want you to imagine for a moment that you're living in the ancient world. And you need to go out and get some flour, maybe an ephah of flour, which is the second largest there. You go out on a Monday morning, and you go to the first stand that you see, and you go and you ask, can I have an ephah of flour? And the shopkeeper fills it up to the top, and you think he's done. It's filled to the top. You have an ephah. But instead, he grabs your container and he lightly taps it against his counter. And you see that the air has settled, and you have an extra 3 inches now in your basket. He fills it again and taps it again, fills it again, and it's overflowing like a heaping tablespoon in a recipe for baking, right? And then he says, that'll be $3.50. You hand him a $5, and impressed by his generosity, you say, keep the change. You go on your way. The next week, you need more flour, so you go out, but this time on a Tuesday. Your guy, his shop is closed. Oh, well, I'll just go to the next one. So you go to the next one, and this guy, he fills up your ephah to the top. He pulls out a knife. He scrapes it along the top to make sure it's exactly an ephah. And then he mumbles coldly to you, that'll be $3.50. You hand over your $5, and you wait patiently for your change, which you take, and you go on your way, promising to never buy flour on a Tuesday ever again. The measure you give is the measure that you will get back. Judge, and you will be judged. Condemn, and you will be condemned. But forgive, and you will be forgiven. Pack someone's flour down and be generous, and they will generally be generous to you. The law of reciprocity in this teaching of Jesus is universally recognized, but seldom practiced. Robbie wrote our liturgy for today, and he quoted the book of James, which encourages us not just to be hearers of the word, but doers of the word. The difficulty of Jesus' teaching here is not that it's a lofty philosophy that we can't understand, it's just that it's hard. It's a high standard, and we don't always do it. Judging others is really easy. Skimping others is really easy. I gave them an ephah. It's filled right to the top. For a minute, I want us to shift our attention in this marketplace analogy and instead imagine yourself as one of the shopkeepers instead of the shopper. Which one did you imagine yourself as? Which one did you instinctively think that you were? The generous one or the stingy one? And remember the statistics that I showed you at the beginning, that we often perceive ourselves as compassionate and generous, and that is not always how other folks see us. Are you subconsciously judging everyone you come across? They dress funny. They have an accent that I think doesn't sound very educated. That mom can't control her kids. Are you really going out dressed like that? Look at their car. It's held together with chewing gum and duct tape. Or look at them in their fancy car. They think they're so much better than me. Wow, so-and-so is such a prude and they never cuss. They're no fun. Or, wow, they're so promiscuous and so vulgar. And that's just the mundane judgments, the everyday judgments. What about, I don't know if I can live alongside this person anymore? Much more serious judgments. The takeaway of Jesus' teaching here is to be self-reflective, to examine ourselves before we point the finger at others. Now, we could end the sermon right there. Jesus' words are convicting and applicable, and we should all go home and examine ourselves and our lives and ask, Are we judgmental and condemning, or are we generous and giving? Case closed. Have a good week, everyone. But that is not where Jesus ends his teaching. The second teaching of Jesus is about hypocrisy. Take that log out of your own eye. Because we really should ask the follow-up question to Jesus. Okay, don't judge. But what do we do about right and wrong, Jesus? What do we do when someone that we are in relationship with has acted poorly? Are we allowed to comment on what is going on in our culture? Or are Christians required to practice an extreme and rigid form of live and let live? Are Christians required to essentially be secluded and private people who can't put forward any public concern? Jesus answers this question in these three illustrations. The blind can't lead the blind, the teacher or the student is not above the teacher, and taking the log out of our own eye before seeing the speck in the others. Notice that the problem in these illustrations is hypocrisy, not with moral judgments in themselves. In fact, Jesus is explicit. The speck in your eye isn't a good thing. It's not a good thing to fall into the pit. We need teachers. We need guides. We need good eye surgeons to help us with the speck or the log that we have in our own eye. But all of a sudden, there is a different flavor to the teaching of Jesus about not judging. And I don't know if that comes as a relief to you or if you're a little disappointed that Jesus opens the door a little bit to saying that there might be times to exercise good judgment, good moral discernment. Because let's be real, we don't actually want a world with no good moral teachers or without good judgment. Imagine if upstairs right now in children's church, if your kid was bullying another kid and the teacher just was apathetic about it. Who am I to judge? Or imagine a couple comes into my office and the wife says, he's cheating on me and he's spending all of our money and he is cruel to our children. And my response was, who am I to judge? In fact, who are you to judge? Doesn't Jesus say, condemn not? No, that's not exactly what Jesus is teaching here, is it? But what then? What is Jesus telling us about judgments, about condemnations? He's teaching us about the posture that we take. He's talking to us about hypocrisy. He's talking to us about exercising judgment with a posture of mercy and grace and compassion and mutuality. It's ironic because I'm up on a stage behind a pulpit teaching you about morals. But the image that Jesus is giving is to walk alongside, to attend to your own transformation before you're concerned about the person sitting next to you. You know, it's ironic that here we host AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. But I doubt those statistics are talking about the folks in Alcoholics Anonymous, encouraging each other, being accountable to one another, to their own personal transformations. No, they're talking about us in the sanctuary. The type of moral striving and moral instruction that Christians are encouraged to is one of humility and mercy and compassion and walking alongside. I'll end with a clip that I want to show you from one of my favorite TV shows, The West Wing. Now, The West Wing follows the President of the United States and his senior staff. And the clip that I'm going to show you has two characters. Josh Lyman, who is the Deputy Chief of Staff, and Leo McGarry, the Chief of Staff. These are two of the closest advisors to the President. Now, Josh has just been recovering from a gunshot wound that he has received when he is out with the president. He's recovered physically, but you can tell he is struggling mentally. He comes into work one day and his hand is cut, and he tells everyone, I was drinking a glass and I put it down and it shattered. I've cut my hand. Well, Leo McGarry, who's the chief of staff, requires him to go see a therapist. Right there in the West Wing, they bring in a guy. And something important to know about Leo McGarry is he's a recovering alcoholic. It's a secret. People don't know. He thinks it would ruin his political career. But he is sober, but struggling all the time. Josh Lyman sees the therapist, and they eventually get to the point where he did not cut his hand with a glass. He broke a window. And the therapist tells him, I think you have PTSD. And Josh says, that doesn't sound good. That doesn't sound like someone who serves this close to the president should have. Now, it was the late 90s, so there's a lot more stigma around therapy and mental health, so take that into account. But he comes out of this therapy session worried about his political future. And that's the clip that we're going to watch.
How'd it go?
Did you wait around for me?
How'd it go?
He thinks I may have an eating disorder.
Josh.
And fear of rectangles. That's not weird, is it? I didn't cut my hand on a glass. I broke a window in my apartment.
This guy's walking down the street when he falls in the hole. The walls are so steep he can't get out. A doctor passes by and the guy shouts up, "Hey, you, can you help me out?" The doctor writes a prescription, throws it down in the hole, and moves on. Then a priest comes along and the guy shouts up, "Father, I'm down in this hole, can you help me out?" The priest writes out a prayer, throws it down in the hole, and moves on. Then a friend walks by. "Hey, Joe, it's me, can you help me out?" And the friend jumps in the hole. Our guy says, "Are you stupid? Now we're both down here." The friend says, "Yeah, but I've been down here before and I know the way out." Long as I got a job, you got a job, you understand?
You know what I love about that scene in the West Wing is that it feels like a parable to me. It feels a lot like the parable of the Good Samaritan. But whereas the punchline of the Good Samaritan is about our neighbors and how our neighbor is not just the one who's right next to us, who shares all of the same identities that we have, but is expanded out. The punchline of this parable could very properly be Jesus' teaching about the blind not being able to lead the blind, about removing the log out of your own eye before helping another with a speck. Because what we see in that clip is that Leo has taken the log out of his own eye and is able to now walk alongside Josh with his trouble. Josh leaves that therapy session thinking he's about to be an outcast amongst his staff, that he might even lose his job. And instead, it's a moment where he probably feels the most seen and understood and loved and part of the team. It's an amazing transformation that humility brings to a situation. And I think that is exactly the type of posture that Jesus is encouraging us in these passages. One of reciprocity, that you give what you get. You could imagine Leo being very harsh in that instance and saying, "No, you're not fit." Him, a recovering alcoholic. And in that case, I think all of Jesus' teaching about judge and you will not be judged, condemn and you will not be condemned would come absolutely true. Leo would probably get bitten in the butt if he did not have the love and support of his team. But instead, Leo embodies the taking out of the log of your own eye before seeing the speck in anybody else's. I pray that we would be people that can walk alongside our brothers and sisters in the church with the same posture. In a moment, we are going to approach the table of our Lord. The King and Creator of the universe come down in humility and love. In this table, we are called to become more like Christ, to be humble, to be merciful, and to be compassionate. This is my prayer for all of us. Amen.